Hello, everybody, and welcome back to In Depth. I know that between The Power of Reason before and In Depth now, we have been talking a lot about science of cognition, statistics, and history of science. So today, let's talk about something a bit more lighthearted. But not really, because this is In Depth after all. Love. What is it? What causes it? There are entire libraries and innumerable songs and movies about this topic. If there is one thing that is outside the realm of science, it is love. At least this seems to be the understanding of some of you who, in response to my previous two videos on science, stated, what about love? Isn't it the proof that some things are just spiritual and unexplained by science? Of course, while very poetic, I have a couple of things to say about that. One is that spirituality is not by necessity antagonistic to science, but this is for another discussion. Secondly, and in today's agenda, love is a primary motivational system in our human behavior. And like many others, it has a scientific explanation. While this might not be final or complete, it definitely adds up against the evidence so far. So, under this optic, let's ask again, what is love? I promise that I won't ruin this for you. On the contrary, like always, we pursue knowledge undeterred and come out always better off. This is the spirit of going in depth. So, if we were paying attention 20 seconds ago, I already gave away something of our answer. I said love is a primary motivation system. So not a feeling. What's the difference? Hunger is a motivation system. It motivates you to seek food and eat it. Love motivates you to mate and take care of your offspring. So already 80% of the songs that we know are out of the window when it comes to scientific accuracy. But don't be mad at me. I promise that I do appreciate romantic songs. But hear me out a little longer because it gets better or worse depending on how you take it. So here is a definition that I found in a paper within the Indian Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism, out of all places one needs for inspiration about love. It reads something like this. Love may be defined as an emergent property of an ancient cocktail of neuropeptides and neurotransmitters. An emergent property. I love that. A bit like free will. But once again, this is for another time. Okay, I know that this is not at all clear, but it will be. For now, let's take a step back and talk about hormones and neurotransmitters. Very, very simply, these are chemicals produced by your body, and they act a bit like messengers. They circulate around to regulate a variety of bodily functions, and they control behaviors. Some of these chemicals act as both hormones and neurotransmitters. Let's say for now that it's just semantics. If the chemical is in your bloodstream, it's a hormone. If it travels through your nervous system, it is a neurotransmitter. It can be the same chemical. Once again, this is a very simplified version. But more interestingly, how do these chemicals alter behavior? First, let's say some areas of your brain are wired to respond to certain neurotransmitters. Also, different areas of your brain have different functions. So, increasing or decreasing a hormone in your body can make you behave one way or another. Very well-known neurotransmitters or hormones are, for example, adrenaline. An increase in adrenaline alters your behavior and your body. You are more alert, you're more focused, you feel less pain, your palms are sweaty, and your heart rate is up. Your pupils are dilated, ready to fight or fly. All of this from just a little molecule floating around your body. Or dopamine, another neurotransmitter associated with your reward system. Dopamine makes you feel good, euphoric, like when you accomplish something or you get rewarded for behavior. And dopamine reinforces that behavior, makes you seek more of it. And it is a good example of how a neurotransmitter affects your behavior. Cocaine, for example, increases your dopamine levels, making you feel euphoric, and definitely affecting your behavior, but also hijacking your reward mechanisms. You now seek more and more cocaine. Okay, this took a heavy turn very quickly. When are we talking about love? I'm getting to it, and I will explain how a cocktail of chemicals results in the emergence of love. But first, I like to compare this mixture of chemicals to a recipe. Say a recipe for chocolate cake. If I want to describe not only how to make a good chocolate cake, but also how the chemistry of baking it works, I cannot simply list the ingredients. I need the doses, I need the procedure, the temperatures, the timings. I need to know what happens while it all bakes. I need to understand that one ingredient may have multiple roles, and sometimes too much of a good thing is bad too. And also, all the ingredients are important. Even if chocolate is arguably the most important ingredient in a chocolate cake, I cannot have only chocolate, or it won't be a cake. I need all the other ingredients, and in the right proportions. Take buttermilk, for example. People use buttermilk in red velvet cakes, a subset of chocolate cakes. Buttermilk not only adds to the flavor, but also to the moist consistency and the texture. On top of that, its acidity is essential in the reaction with the baking soda. This reaction produces the gases that will make your cake rise and be spongy. So, buttermilk is good, but if you put 10 times the amount, you will have no cake. And if I put none, I will have a dry and stodgy flat thing. If I want a recipe without buttermilk, I need to replace moisture and acidity with something else. All these ingredients serve multiple purposes in the cake when combined with other ingredients. Butter goes in the mix, but also is used to grease the tin and is used in the icing with sugar. Same ingredient, combine it with different proportions and ingredients, and you get different results. Now that you're in a baking mood, let me present you the ingredients of love. It's like in a cake. The ingredients are mixed differently to make different parts. For example, the sponge, the filling, and the icing. The mainstream understanding is that romantic love is the combination of three distinct but intertwined processes in the brain: lust, attraction, and attachment. These are like a bit like the sponge, the filling, and the icing. Each process is mediated by different neurotransmitters or hormones. These are the ingredients. The first two ingredients are the sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, which are in this case responsible for lust and sex drive. When we see someone who we are attracted to sexually, the hippocampus, a region deep in the brain, stimulates the production of testosterone in men and estrogen in women. Testosterone in smaller amounts plays a big role in sex drive for women too, actually. It is interesting to notice at this point how some studies have shown activation of different areas of the brain in men and women in association with sexual attraction. In men, activity is increased in areas associated with visual stimuli. In women, in regions of the brain associated with attention, with memory and emotion. And this could explain why men respond more strongly to visual signals such as beauty, while women often find other things such as status attractive. This is of course a huge generalization, but it's worth noting. After identifying someone we are sexually attracted to, if the courtship proceeds, the second phase after lust is attraction. I present this in order, but of course it is not a law. The two things may well overlap or happen independently. Attraction and lust are separate, but they go in the overall making of love. I'm just describing the most classic cake recipe here. So, lust is driven by testosterone and estrogen, And now we're talking about attraction, which is driven by another set of ingredients. These are the reward and stress hormones: dopamine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. Cortisol, a stress hormone, is present at the early stages of love. So it encourages a state of alertness and seeking of social contact. It shakes you into action, so to speak. Norepinephrine acts very similarly to adrenaline, for example. It makes you euphoric, alert, but also gives you an increased heart rate, sweating and trembling, all things that are associated with the experience of being loved. And this is why people think that love comes from the heart, because that's where you feel the effect of norepinephrine. Of course, it is not your heart, but your brain and your peripheral sympathetic nervous system that make you feel like that. But we will carry on enjoying those love songs as they are, nevertheless, because the heart is a good metaphor, and it sounds a lot better than the scientific jargon. Norepinephrine gives you alertness, but it is also what makes you sleepless, and it makes you lose your appetite. And in a way, it clouds your frontal cortex, the area of the brain associated with rational and responsible behavior. Love makes you stupid, they say. So, when you think it's a good idea to, say, stay up all night, having fun with your new lover, but then you can still go to work early the day after, that's norepinephrine doing the job. The other major ingredient in the first few weeks and months of love is dopamine, which is the best known reward hormone. And I mentioned this earlier. Dopamine is released when we are together with the person we are in love with, enhancing our mood, reducing our emotional judgment towards them, and reducing our fear, also reducing depression. It's great, really. It gives us increased focus. We become focused on doing anything possible to be together or to get more attention from them. When you're baking a chocolate cake for them instead of studying for your final exams, it is dopamine make you shift the focus so dramatically. You now prioritize the other person because you want more of that person. Another interesting fact is that cortisol, the stress hormone, will lead to more dopamine being released, reinforcing the mechanism. This is why passion usually increases in the face of adversity. If you're meeting someone you love when you're not supposed to, and you feel a childlike excitement from the risk of getting caught, this increases the stress and cortisol. But cortisol leads to more dopamine and falling in love even more. This is why exciting dates make you fall in love more, like secretly sneaking out of an important event together, or a dangerous adventure, or a hike, or the classic spooky ride at the theme park. So, attraction, in summary, results from the mixing of dopamine, cortisol, and norepinephrine. But that's not all. These hormones, together with the increase in testosterone in both men and women, cause a reduction in serotonin. Serotonin is a hormone that regulates mainly your gut function, but it also stabilizes your mood. It makes you calm and in control. A reduction in serotonin makes you obsessive. This is why you're obsessed with your crush. You bring them up in a conversation with friends, even if it has nothing to do with them. Or serotonin, a drop in serotonin is also why you fantasize about your next holiday together, or keep checking your phone obsessively for their messages. People who suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder, also known as OCD, have, generally speaking, low levels of serotonin. So there you have it. It makes all sense now. Now, we now know the recipe for both lust and attraction. And it all sounds like a whirlwind of stress and happiness. But how does all of this result in a long-term relationship? Well, let me present you the recipe for attachment. So we've seen lust, attraction, and now attachment. Attachment is what provides some sort of relief from all of this emotional roller coaster. Attachment in this case relates to romantic attachment, but it applies also more generally to friendship and gregariousness. The number one ingredient here is oxytocin, also known as the cuddle hormone or the trust hormone. Oxytocin makes us bond, makes us feel love for someone, but not the being in love described above, which is exclusive to romantic relationships. Here we could be also talking about the love for a child, or a parent, or a friend. Oxytocin is released in great amounts during sex, childbirth, or breastfeeding, which are all very bonding experiences. Oxytocin works in conjunction with vasopressin, another hormone which helps in forming attachment. But while oxytocin results in a more passive form of attachment, vasopressin causes a more aggressive form of attachment. The sort of attachment that makes you protective towards your partner against strangers. Naturally, here there are differences between men and women. During sexual arousal, testosterone goes up in both men and women, increasing aggressiveness. But for a woman, oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, increases leading up to sex, during and after sex. While a man's oxytocin is somewhat inhibited by the higher level of testosterone. So here comes the other ingredient, vasopressin, a more ancient hormone, which drives attachment for men towards the lover. And it increases with sexual arousal in men, but then it reduces to baseline after the orgasm. This is for men. So women, generally speaking, incur a higher emotional risk when having sex with someone for the first time, a notion that is correctly reflected in popular culture. Now, given that we are talking about sex, it is worth noting that sexual activity not only promotes attachment in both men and women, but also shoots up dopamine levels, reinforcing the reward pathways that makes us want someone more and more. So, while love and sex follow separate pathways, sexual activity with a long-term partner can increase attachment. This mechanism, together with the attachment hormones oxytocin and vasopressin, promotes monogamy in humans. Monogamy is rare in the animal kingdom, and it presents itself when biparental care is essential. For example, animals living in harsh environments, or animals with a delicate offspring, like humans. Humans, because of their large brains, are born prematurely in order for the large head of the baby to be able to fit through the birth canal. This means that a human baby is completely helpless for several years while it develops. The presence of both parents ensures a safe environment for growth. This was especially true for most of human history, and this is why the ancestors of our species evolved to be monogamous. Oxytocin is a relatively new hormone, present primarily in monogamous mammals. The fact that breastfeeding releases high doses of oxytocin could also explain why female humans, or women, possess enlarged breasts compared to other species. Stimulation of the breast during sexual intercourse promotes attachment to the partner. So, here is the recipe of love at last. We have lust, attraction, and attachment, which are made up of a cocktail of testosterone and estrogen, dopamine, norepinephrine, cortisol, serotonin, oxytocin, and vasopressin. And it all makes love wonderful. But hold on a moment. I can hear many of you saying, love hurts. In fact, thinking back, those love songs that I keep talking about, they are mainly about heartbreak, about jealousy or infidelity. So how do you explain all of that if we have just painted the perfect recipe for love? Just like for our chocolate cake, it is easy to mess it up. I'm sure that you know this if you ever attempted baking. Some ingredients, wrong mix, different doses, timings, temperature. For every good cake that we make, we might have failed a few before. So what makes love go wrong? I already mentioned a few things that sounded a bit dangerous, like increased aggressiveness due to the sex hormones, or the clouding of good judgment due to the increase in norepinephrine, or the obsessiveness derived from the drop in serotonin. Of course, an excess in any of these features is not healthy, but within reason, this can also be considered exciting in a way. After all, when our heart beats or we become silly for love, we are happy. Dopamine is also responsible for this happiness, and this is where it can go south. I mentioned before that dopamine controls the reward pathways deep in our brain, and this is how addiction works too. Love is a form of addiction. We can become tolerant to the substance, wanting more and more. And of course, this is what makes breakups or unrequited love so heart-wrenching. We feel the full force of the withdrawals. And like for a drug, we can also suffer from relapse. Like an addict, even if we know on an intellectual level that we should move on, we cannot help it. It's a strong feeling. And that's why we have so many rock and roll songs which are both about addiction and about heartbreak. The songs which I dismissed at the start become more and more accurate by the minute. Maybe the artists were onto something before the scientists. Love and addiction, dangerous game. Then, of course, there is jealousy. So, oxytocin, the cuddle and trust hormone itself, responsible for the loving feeling of attachment, together with vasopressin, can also be the cause for suspicion, aggressiveness, possessiveness, and jealousy, with associated irrational behaviors. Think about drugs such as MDMA or GHB, which all increase your oxytocin signaling, making you feel so happy and loving and appreciative. But when in excess, can also make you irrational, paranoid, and shaky. But why does it happen in love? Well, it's all part of the main job of oxytocin, promoting monogamy. Oxytocin promotes attachment, but also protectiveness from strangers. When you think of evolution, always remember the fact that our current environment is very different from the environment we evolved in as primitive people. And this is why some behaviors can get out of control. And this brings me to the last point. The last and additional reason why, despite of all these chemicals designed for love, the majority of love relationships that have a beginning have also unavoidably an end. Infidelity. How does one explain infidelity if our brain is wired for monogamy? Isn't this in contradiction to everything that has been said so far? Well, another question that, luckily for those of you who came this far, and I know we've gone really far, another question that has an answer, at least to the best of our knowledge. So, the key thing to observe here is how lust, attraction, and attachment are separate entities. and work independently of one another. And rightly so. One can feel attachment towards their friends and their children. Attachment. But attraction and lust have no place in those relationships. This is why, for different processes, we have different combinations of neurotransmitters. But here is the thing. One can feel deep attachment towards their spouse or long-term partner while feeling romantic love for someone else, and sex drive in random situations. Now, how one manages all of that is subject of another debate altogether, and it's the realm of philosophy and ethics. But all I'm saying here is that it is physiologically possible, and in fact, rather common. After all, our most ancient evolutionary conformation drives us to seek the highest number of sexual partners because this increases the chances of reproduction. This is why we exist now. We are the bloodline of successful reproducers. So there it is. The curse of human nature, once again, its duality. We are built to increase our chances of reproduction by seeking out multiple partners, but also we are built for monogamy to increase the chances of survival of the offspring. Contrasting needs simultaneously within us. Personal happiness takes second place in evolution when it comes to reproduction. We are not built for happiness. Happiness is just a reward system that drives us to do things and ultimately survive longer and reproduce more. Happiness is the means, not the end. Clearly, since the Enlightenment, science, medicine, industry, government, institutions, they have detached the need for monogamy from the survival of the children. It's possible for children to survive with a single parent. And this is why monogamy is not as successful now as it has historically been. Most marriages officially end in divorce. Monogamy is an old genetic and social construct, albeit still a very good one when it comes to raising children. And in fact, also for the well-being of the individuals involved. Long-term relationships promote stability, mental health, and reduce depression. And after all, it can be a fulfilling experience. Purpose in life is more important than happiness, because happiness comes and goes. So, what have we learned from all of this? Is this going to change how we feel about love? Have I taken the magic away from love? I don't think so. People talk about the curse of knowledge. I can see why, I suppose, but I am a firm believer in the notion that knowledge is power, always. We know how to make a chocolate cake, every ingredient, but it doesn't change its taste. It is still delicious, and in fact, even more so, knowing what goes into it. Thank you so much for listening.